Dracula, destroyed. Real name, Vlad Dracula. Occupation, former Prince of Transylvania and Voivode, or Prince of Wallachia, ruler of Earth's vampires. Identity, the general public believes that Dracula died in the 15th century and never became a vampire. Legal status, former Prince of Transylvania and Wallachia. Former aliases, Vlad Tepes, the Impaler, Count Dracula. Dracula assumed the title of Count without legal basis after becoming a vampire. Place of birth, Schauspurg, Transylvania, now Romania. Place of death, Transylvania. Place of final destruction, Castle Mordo, Transylvania. Marital status, married 3 times. Known survivors, Domini, wife, separated, Janus, son, Frank Drake, descendant. Group affiliation, ruler of Earth's vampires. First appearance, Tomb of Dracula number 1. Final appearance, Doctor Strange number 62. History. Vlad Dracula was born in 1430 as the son of Vlad Dracul, who became Prince of Wallachia, a Romanian principality bordering Transylvania, in 1431. The Turkish Sultan Murad II took Dracula and his brother Radu prisoner in 1444. The suffering which Dracula and Radu endured in captivity killed Radu and filled Dracula with hatred for humanity. Dracula escaped in 1449 and held his late father's throne for 8 months. Between 1451 and 1456, he married Zofia, a noblewoman, as his father had wished. Shortly after the birth of their daughter, Dracula ordered Zofia to take the infant and leave him forever. Zofia committed suicide, and the baby eventually became the vampiress Lilith. See, Lilith. In 1456, Dracula regained his throne and fought a war with the Turks. His practice of impaling hordes of enemies gained him the name Vlad the Impaler. Dracula took a new wife, Maria, and they had a son, Vlad Tepulus. In 1459, Dracula was felled in battle by the Turkish warlord Turak, who captured his castle. On learning that Turkish soldiers had raped Maria, Dracula attacked Turak, who mortally wounded him and brought him to the gypsy Leanda to be healed. Leanda was a vampiress and killed Dracula with her bite, causing him to become a vampire as well. Dracula then killed Turak and recaptured his castle. Maria was by now dead. Dracula defeated the vampire Nimrod in battle, thereby succeeding him as ruler of Earth's vampires, and enhanced his own blood with that of Varney, sole survivor of the first group of vampires created by the Darkhold, a book of black magic, thereby giving Dracula greater powers than any other vampire. Dracula extended his rule through Transylvania and expelled the Turks from his dominions, but abdicated princehood in 1471. In 1597, Dracula moved to the current Castle Dracula near Transylvania's Borgo Pass, and in 1606 began his series of long journeys into the outside world. Since becoming a vampire, Dracula has been killed many times, first in the mid-1550s by the Puritan adventurer Solomon Kane, but Dracula was always eventually resurrected by some means. In the 1890s, Dracula came to England, where he came into conflict with the vampire hunter Abraham Van Helsing and others. Letters and journal entries by Van Helsing and people connected with him were collected by Bram Stoker and published in 1897 as the book Dracula, which the general public wrongly believes is fiction. In recent years, Dracula mystically mated with a human woman, Domini, who bore him a now-human son, Janus. Finally, the cult of Darkholders mystically eliminated all of Dracula's vampiric vulnerabilities except one. It was through the magic of the Darkhold that vampires were first created, and a mystical formula within it, called the Montesi formula, after the late monk who discovered it, could be used to destroy all of Earth's vampires forever. Through this incantation, the master sorcerer Dr. Strange and various allies, including Dracula's own descendant, Frank Drake, completely obliterated Dracula, leaving no trace of him whatsoever, as well as all other vampires on Earth, except for the heroic Hannibal King, whom Strange restored to true life. Height, 6 feet 5 inches. Weight, 220 pounds. Eyes, red. Hair, black. Powers. Dracula was the most powerful of all vampires in history. Vampirism originated in pre-cataclysmic Atlantis when certain mystics discovered the indestructible parchments upon which the demon Thon had inscribed spells. These parchments would later be bound into the book named the Darkhold. The mystics used a spell in the parchments to turn their enemies into vampires. The vampires slaughtered much of the Atlantean populace and managed to survive the cataclysm. Vampires require the fresh blood of living beings, preferably humans, in order to sustain their existence, and usually procure it through biting their victims, usually on the neck, and draining blood. The vampire's bite deposits an enzyme found in the vampire's saliva into the bloodstream of the victim. If the vampire draws enough blood to cause the victim to die, the enzyme triggers a metabolic change in the dead victim's body, beginning with the production of a green liquid called ichor in the bloodstream. In approximately 3 days, there is sufficient ichor to nourish the victim's body in the same way that blood once did. The victim then returns to life as a vampire, capable of all the basic functions of life, except procreation, plus a number of supernatural feats, such as transforming into a bat. If the victim's blood loss is not severe enough to cause death, the victim will show signs of anemia because of effects of the enzyme in his or her bloodstream, but will not die. Until the enzyme is fully metabolized, a process that can take anywhere from 2 weeks to several months, the victim will be weak and sickly, as well as susceptible to the hypnotic commands conveyed verbally or through long-range mental contact by the vampire who attacked him or her. The victim will also develop a perverse erotic attraction to that vampire. Most vampires prefer to attack victims of the opposite sex. Dracula had all the conventional powers of a vampire, but to a far greater extent than any other vampire, except possibly Lilith, because of the power he had absorbed from Varney, see history, because of the centuries that Dracula had spent developing his own powers, and because of his extremely strong will. Most vampires gain superhuman strength anywhere from 10 to 20 times as great as they had in mortal life. Dracula was able to lift, approximately 250 pounds as a mortal. As a vampire, he was able to lift over 2,000 pounds. Dracula was able to summon thunderstorms of considerable fury, although the mystical concentration left him quite drained. He could summon and control certain creatures, such as bats, wolves, and rats, and could transform himself into a bat, even one of human size, or a wolf, while retaining his human intelligence in that form. He could transform himself at will into mist. As Lord of Vampires, Dracula could control the will of all vampires of lesser mental strength than his. He could make any human into his temporary slave if he could catch his or her gaze for at least 3 seconds. He needed more time to mesmerize especially strong human minds. Dracula could telepathically make contact from over a great distance with the minds of his living victims from whom he had drained blood, but he could not do so with other vampires. Vampires had several limitations upon their supernatural powers and existence. The first was their all-consuming craving for blood. Unless a vampire drank approximately 1 quart of fresh blood every other night, it would weaken and either fall comatose or perish. Some vampires of great power, like Dracula, were able to resist their bloodlust for up to a week before their hunger became unbearable. Vampires were also limited by their supernatural dependence upon the soil of the land of their birth. Vampires cannot travel for more than 100 miles from the place where they were born unless they have taken along at least a pound of their native soil with which to line their coffin or sleeping area. Vampires fall into a comatose state during daylight hours and can only spend it safely when in contact with their native soil. Otherwise, the vampire would be endangered by another weakness. Vampires are unable to withstand the direct rays of the sun. Due to the vampire's altered metabolism, sunlight causes the ichor to congeal in the vampire's veins and the skin to decay rapidly. Direct exposure causes a vampire to dehydrate completely and turn to powder. Vampires have a mystical aversion to garlic plants. The wearing of at least 1 clove around one's neck is sufficient to ward off a vampire. Further, a vampire cannot use its shape-changing abilities while within about 20 feet of a garlic clove. Vampires also have an aversion to any religious artifact, such as a cross, Star of David, or holy water, wielded or placed by anyone who believes in the spirit that the object signifies. The size of the artifact is not a consideration in its ability to repel vampires, only the strength of belief. For example, a believing Christian wielding a small cross can hold a vampire at bay with it, and even sear the vampire's flesh simply by touching him or her with it. Vampires also have a mystical aversion to entering any human dwelling place to which they are not verbally invited. Once invited, they may enter the place at any time thereafter. Vampires cast no reflections, and their images cannot be captured on film. Vampires do not age, except on some, but not all, occasions when they have been deprived of blood for lengthy periods of time. Then a vampire may develop some signs of age. For example, its hair may turn from black to white, but upon ingesting fresh blood it will revert to the age that it was when it died as a human being. In the case of at least some vampires, including Dracula, minor injuries they receive will heal within moments. For example, Dracula has had his forehead seared by a cross, but the marks of injury vanished quickly. However, a vampire cannot grow back a severed portion of its body. Apart from periodic inconveniences, injuries like these will not critically impair a vampire's life or effectiveness. Because the vampire's ichor is similar in function to blood, poisons and other toxic substances that are circulated in its bloodstream will adversely affect a vampire, although no dosage is large enough to cause death. The only substances which can cause a vampire pain are silver and, to a lesser extent, unless it penetrates its heart, wood. The surest way to kill a vampire is to drive a wooden stake or a silver blade through its heart. The stake or blade prevents the heart from supplying ichor to the rest of the body. If the stake or blade is removed, however, even if the vampire's body has crumbled to dust, the vampire's mystical vitality will restore its body in the condition it had before it was killed and return it to life. Beheading a vampire will also kill it. However, there are only 3 methods of making sure of destroying a vampire permanently. One is to expose the vampire to direct sunlight and then scatter the ashes. Another is to pierce the vampire's heart with wood or silver, sever its head, burn the head and body in separate places, and scatter the 2 resulting piles of ashes in separate locations. The third is to make use of the full incantation from the Darkhold that is known as the Montesi formula. This is the means by which Dracula appears to have been permanently destroyed.